What is good, Tesla family? It's Ray J back with another video. And in this one, I wanted to break down what's going on with Tesla, SPY, Nvidia, the QQQ, and many tickers out there. I'm going to break down what's very probable to happen to them based off the current technicals and based off the catalysts coming out for the week. But before I do anything like this, let me just mention a couple of things. I'm firstly not a financial planner, so make sure you take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you are guaranteed up to 12 free stocks. The offer ends very soon and ends in just about 3 days, so check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. Tesla was down 1.1% for the day on Friday, once again trying to base around this 240 level and actually held above it for the large majority of the day. But the question is, how will Tesla move from here? Will Tesla continue to push up, or is Tesla going to see a little bit more downside before anything else? I'm going to answer that question in just a couple of minutes, but let's first talk about some data. Don't forget that tomorrow at about 11 o'clock a.m. Eastern Time or in New York time, we have the Consumer Inflationary Expectations Report coming out. And this is expected to be around this 3.8%. So let's hope that this is pretty decent, which could help the markets. So be on the lookout for some volatility during this time. Also for earnings, we have some decent ones coming out for the week, in my opinion. We have Monday.com, we have Jinko, and the list goes on for Monday. Nothing too crazy for Monday. But then for Tuesday, we have the Home Depot, we have C, and the list goes on. Lots of retail will be coming out for this week, such as Target and Cisco for Wednesday, TJ Maxx as well. And then for Thursday, we have Walmart, Dole, and a couple of others like Ross, and then Xpeng for Friday. So I'm going to break these down in just a couple of minutes, at least some of these retail ones. And I'm also going to talk about this. Looking at Tesla, the volume was only 99 million. And this is a pretty good sign because if you think about it, Tesla's not dropping on high volume. We're not getting aggressive selling on Tesla. If the volume starts going up like crazy and we get some like really bad news, then yes, that could completely shift this. But so far, it's looking pretty good because the volume is not that aggressive. It's not getting this aggressive sell orders that cause it to sink very hard. It's trying to base that 240. You can see it right here. And looking at the short volume on Tesla relative to price, this did go up a little bit on Friday, but it's not that bad. That's part of why Tesla was red, but it's still not that bad, only at like 54% compared to like these higher levels when this was around like 60%, 65%. It's nowhere near that. So that still is a decent sign overall. And to add on to this, looking at some new data that came out, we could see that Morgan Stanley is giving Tesla an equal weight rating. That's still the latest analyst that came out. The price peers ratio on Tesla is declining a little bit as Tesla's losing some strength. But what is good about it is Mondays tend to be very strong days historically, about 53% of the time, a little bit more than half the time. We tend to do better on Mondays. Looking at some more data, we tend to see Tesla do better during the third, fifth, and sixth hours of the trading day. Now this has been adjusted, so the sixth hour tends to be a lot more powerful for Tesla as of recent. So watch it a lot more carefully during that. And then finally, the short interest has gone up just a little bit. We did see a little bit more shorting on Tesla, but it's nothing too crazy overall. This is still very low compared to these levels like up here. So it's not getting shorted aggressively, but it did get shorted a little bit more on Friday. That's part of why it started to drop a bit. And we will see how this continues. Could we see a mini short squeeze on Tesla if it tries to break resistance? That is a possibility, but we have to see a break first. Now, the biggest news that came out on Friday was that the NHTSA opened a special probe into the fatal crash that happened in Virginia. There was also another crash that was reported in San Fernando, California. So these are sad things that happen, but you have to remember that millions of people have Teslas, okay? There are lots and lots of these Teslas around the world. So if millions and millions of more people get them, it is probable that eventually there will be accidents. They're almost inevitable for cars, at least during these days. For certain, every single car company will have to go through them. So we can't really just focus on these and not focus on many of the safety features because Teslas are still relatively safe cars. They're very durable. They got some very high safety scores. I do want to call Tesla out for that, but I also want to mention that there have been some talks about them like being very hard to basically extinguish if they ever catch on fire and things like that. So there are pros and cons, but I just want to say that these cars have a lot of cameras. These cars have lots of great safety features, and these cars are very, very awesome when it comes to their like views for their users using their user interfaces and etc. So I don't really want to hate on Tesla when we talk about like these crashes and things like this. They do happen. Tesla has to try to improve every day nonetheless, but I want to note that Teslas are still relatively safe cars despite this. It doesn't matter if you have a Toyota, if you have a Honda, it doesn't matter what type of car you have. a Kia, the list goes on. These cars will have accidents. They do happen. It could be sometimes because of the drivers. It could also be because of the FSD. Technically, it is a possibility. Sometimes mistakes could happen. But if anything, the technology Tesla is developing is improving. It's constantly improving. And eventually, it's going to help avoid more and more accidents that end up coming. I really believe that. I think that we're getting closer. And I really believe that this technology is going to work for the benefit of humanity. I want to make that as clear as possible for all the naysayers out there. I believe in it. I believe Tesla has so much potential. I believe we will have fully self-driving vehicles in the future. I think it's going to work out. It may take many years, unlike what Elon Musk has said. I mean, he did, his dates are not always perfect. I know that, but the truth is, it's great stuff for Tesla. And now I just want to break down the technicals for it. From a fundamental standpoint, okay, things are not always that great for Tesla, especially going into this latest deliveries report where Tesla told us that there could be some declines in production. Uh, is this intentional? It could be intentional because of the growth phase that's happening, because Tesla has to make a lot of adjustments to prepare itself for massive growth. There could be another factor, such as the current conditions of the economy that are affecting maybe their deliveries and things like that. Those could be external factors that may affect Tesla. But for now, we're not really seeing fundamentals playing a massive role in Tesla's current price action. This is going to happen more as we approach bigger dates. And I just want to focus more on the technical side of things because I think technicals are really going to be pretty big, at least for this week. So what I'm seeing on Tesla, like I said yesterday, we do have this, falling wedge that is developing on Tesla, which tends to lead to bullish outcomes, at least to some degree, if we could get some kind of breakout, which I think is very probable. Now, Tesla SPY and the QQQ, like I showed you guys in yesterday's video, they have bullish divergences developing right now, and they all have falling wedges, which could lead to bullish outcomes. Now, the two most probable outcomes for Tesla, in my opinion, are going to be either it like touches 244 again, then it bounces and tries to break out thanks to the bullish divergences, or if we get one little bad piece of news, it comes down to 235 and then it tries to bounce. That's going to be another possibility. If it remains in this wedge, it could continue to sink, but we need some like really, really bad news to continue for that to happen. We need some like horrible news to come out, like a massive recall, bank failures for the market to continue sinking very hard. I'm not seeing that so far. And so far, at the time of recording this, these are the two most probable outcomes. Tesla either bounces from the current level and starts pushing thanks to the triple bullish divergence, or it drops a little bit to like this 235 level, continues forming the divergence, and then it bounces. It's got to be one of those two most likely, in my opinion. Like I showed you guys for SPY and the QQQ, the same things are developing. On SPY, we have this bullish falling wedge and this very strong confluence of support. This little rectangle you can see is just our like really important demand zone, which was a previous supply zone. This was resistance where the cup and handle breakout was, and now it's acting as support. And on top of this, this blue trend line right here is acting as support. We also have this bullish falling wedge that is forming, so that's a pretty decent sign. If we could get a base around this 444 level, then I see the market potentially bouncing. It's also possible for us to come down to like 442 and then bounce, but I think a bounce is going to likely come most likely. If there's a really major bad piece of news, I could adjust my current claim, and we could remain in this falling wedge for a little bit longer. But I do think a bounce is going to be more probable. If you want more details on this, I talked a lot about this yesterday. I just want to quickly talk about a Walmart. Someone did request this. Looking at Walmart, I'm not too excited about the technicals approaching earnings because when you zoom out, okay, zoom out of this chart, you will see that there's this clear uh, wedge that's forming. It's forming this rising wedge. It's been continuing to form this. And the problem is going into big earnings, that is not a very, very good sign because this tends to lead to bearish outcomes. I'm also going to be a little concerned about their overall guidance. They might not have the strongest of guidances. And we've been developing this wedge for, once again, many, many, many weeks. It's been a very long time. So, like I said, I'd be very concerned. I wouldn't really want to buy up here unless, earnings are really, really awesome and they have strong guidance. Like, I would really change my perspectives. I just think that if you're going to be putting in thousands of dollars into a stock, would you really buy something that has such like a bullish looking, I mean, a bullish, not, sorry, not a bullish, a bearish rising wedge like this, right? I wouldn't necessarily buy at these high levels. It looks to me like it might get a break to the downside soon because having such a strong rising wedge approaching earnings is just not a great sign. So, non-financial advice, by the way, this is not financial advice, but I just want to make it clear that I don't really like how this is looking approaching its earnings. It looks to me like it might get a break to the downside. That seems more probable. I don't know. I do not know for sure what's going to happen. I don't know with 100% certainty. Anything could happen with earnings, but I believe it's more probable that this is going to break down. I find that much more probable, and be very careful when trying to play earnings in general because of the fact that they could be unpredictable and also because of implied volatility that could completely screw over a lot of people. Anyways, going back to Tesla, I know I was kind of going on a rant about Walmart. For Tesla in particular, here's what I'm seeing as the two most probable outcomes. Okay, this thing might retest this 240 area. If it's forming a base here, we're going to see buyers stepping in, just like how we saw these wicks forming. Buyers came back on this 240 area, and it might retest it, then get a bounce and push all the way back up slowly to about 248 to 250 later on this week. I think that's going to be very probable, as long as there isn't a major bad piece of news. Another possibility would be, instead of stopping at 240, if we come down to like 238, we could retest this. If we break it, then like 235 is a possibility. So if we hit 235, we could drop a little bit more and then get the bounce. That's also a possibility depending on the news. I find both of these very probable. My guts tells me 240 is going to be in. It's just going to try to bounce from here, but I could be wrong. It could go a little bit lower to 235 and then get a big bounce back to this like 248 area. But it looks to me like it's going to try to bounce right here, drop a little bit, then bounce, as we're seeing a lot of buyers so far, and we're seeing Tesla trying to base around here with the triple bullish divergence. So I find that more probable. That is what I'm predicting, but I'm always prepared for the downside possibility if there's a bad piece of news, right? I showed you guys the wedge on Tesla. So always remember to be watching this wedge very carefully. Tesla's stuck in this wedge. If we get a break to the upside, that could be a signal that Tesla's getting ready to start pushing. We have this bullish falling wedge that is developed. All right, so I think these two possibilities are the most likely. So watch for them in the morning. See if Tesla ends up retesting 238 to come down to fill the gap at 235 before bouncing, or it might just touch 240. And if we get enough buyers, it could just bounce from here and start pushing for 250 plus. I find both of these very probable. I think these are the two most probable outcomes. I'm going to be eyeing these levels to be tested. But always be prepared in case there's like a really bad piece of news. If something really bad happens, we could remain in the wedge for a little longer. I just find that less likely, and I think these two are the most likely possibilities. And I am predicting something like this to happen to Tesla. Most likely, the green line is what's going to happen. It just drops a little bit, then bounces. I think that's most likely what's going to happen. So, anyways, looking at SPY, I'm seeing something very similar developing on it. There's a potential bullish looking wedge developing. And on top of this, I just want to mention that this thing has been forming a triple bullish divergence on the MACD and the RSI. And on top of this, we're seeing a lot of buyers trying to get to this confluence of support that I showed you guys earlier, right? The previous resistance from the breakout level at that 444 area, then the trend lines and etc. all suggest to me that we're going to try to base at 444. We're going to see SPY come down to 444, then bounce and push all the way up to about 448 or so. I find that more probable. Could we drop down to like 443.3? If that breaks, then 442 is a possibility before it bounces. We have a gap down at 442, so if that gets filled, then it could bounce afterwards. But I'm not like leaning in that direction. I think it might try to base very soon, either at 444 or 442, and then bounce very nicely. I think most likely 444 will be it, and it bounces from there and it tries to push back up to 448 to 450. I think that's very likely. I find that very probable. For IWM, it's the same thing. It might come down to about this support right here at 190, then bounce and try to push back up to about 192. And if that breaks, 193.5 is a possibility. For Apple stock, if you look at this, this is forming like an inverse head and shoulders like structure. If it bases around here, if it does not break down, okay, if it does not break below 176.5, if it does, then like 175 is a possibility. But I'm not leaning in that direction. I think it's more likely to be forming a base right here, form an inverse head and shoulders and stripe, and then try pushing up to 180 over the next day or two. I find that more probable. So that's what I think is very likely. For the triple Q, this looks like it's trying to base at 365, but I did show you guys supports from earlier, so let me just show you these again. On the QQQ, let me just mention that there's a possibility that it could drop a little bit more before it bounces. It could drop down to these supports. I don't know how low it may go because there's once again like 365-ish. This is support. We have 363.5, 362, and then 360. Somewhere here, it's going to bounce most likely. It has a very nice looking bullish falling wedge that is developed. We're going to be watching to see which one it is. It either bounces here or it comes down a little lower and then it bounces to like 363 and then bounce. Not too sure. I think I'm leaning more in the direction of it just bouncing from here and trying to push back up to about 368 or so. to about 370 plus. I think it might retest 365 and then bounce. So I find that more probable. For Nvidia, it looks like it could drop a little bit more. We could see it get close to 400 first and then bounce. It is forming a bullish divergence, so not a guarantee, but what I'm thinking is it either bounces here to back to 420 plus, or it comes a little bit lower to about 400 or a little bit lower than 400, like very close to like 395 or so to 400, and then it bounces. So I find those two very, very probable. A bounce is likely coming from Nvidia very soon, forming a nice divergence. It could drop a little bit more. It's still looking kind of weak, looking weaker than the market. So I wouldn't rule out the possibility of 400 and then a bounce. So that's what I think is very probable for Nvidia. AMD has the same thing. Basically, it could drop a little bit more to 105 or some, if not 102.5. I would say 105 is where it could come to, then bounce, or it just bounces from here. But I'm leaning more towards it dropping a little to like 105 and then bouncing. I think that's more probable. For what else is interesting is the VIX could be forming a head and shoulders like pattern. This could be like a left shoulder. The head could be forming. Maybe it's about to form a right shoulder. Could this thing bounce one last time and then come down, or is it just going to come down from here? If this is a head and shoulders like pattern, it could come down back to the 13s level. This would be because of the market potentially bouncing, causing this to drop. This is like a bullish signal for the markets, this head and shoulders on the VIX. That tells me that a bounce could be coming very soon. Is it going to be a monstrous bounce for the market? I'm not really saying that. I'm just saying like a healthy bounce. The dollar index could be forming a rising wedge right here, so I can actually draw this out. You could draw out this like potential wedge that's forming. And if the dollar does get a break down, that would be bullish for the stock market, right? This is forming a wedge right here. So if the dollar continues to develop this, maybe it pushes a little bit as the market drops a tiny bit more, and then it starts sinking. This is happening as the market has been forming lots of these falling wedges. So that tells me that this thing might actually break down, which would be bullish for the markets. Coinbase should base at 80, then bounce back to 86, or it, 84 plus to then possibly 86, or this thing could drop down to like 77.6 and then get a bounce. So it's got to be one of those two most likely. And then last but not least for Google, there's a possible inverse head and shoulder structure that I'm watching. Could be forming inverse head and shoulders for a pushback to 132, or it drops a little bit more to 129 and then bounces. I think it could drop more and bounce, or it just bounces from here. I think that for Amazon, it could also be forming an inverse head and shoulders. Might come down to about 137.5, then it bounces and pushes back up to 140. I think that's very, very probable. It's looking like it wants to bounce at least base around 137. So I think it could be forming an inverse head and shoulders. That looks very probable. But just to be safe, if 137 fails, let's watch 136. And if it does like truly base around this like 137.5 area, I could see it pushing right back up to 140. And then finally for Meta, this thing is forming a potential like bullish falling wedge right now. So we can actually draw this out like this. If this ends up being the case with this wedge, it could drop a little bit more. I wouldn't rule out the possibility of this dropping just a little bit more. But it should bounce relatively soon. We could get some kind of bounce relatively soon on it, depending on how low it goes. I could see it either basing at 300 if the buyers come in, or it drops a little bit lower into like the very, very high 290s. That could be another possibility, like 295, and then it bounces. But it looks like some buyers may step in, so watch for some buyers at 300. If they could defend this and push this thing back up, I'm going to be watching for a retest of about 308 to 310. That is a possibility for Meta. So watch for a possible bounce with the bullish divergence, or it drops a little bit more and then it bounces after that. That's what I'm leaning towards on Meta. So that's basically my view of the market, guys. I think the odds do favor a potential bounce. To see confirmation of that, let's see if SPY could try to hold this 440 for support. If buyers step in again and they keep defending it, there's a good chance an accumulation is forming here. And they're going to push the market right back up. And as the market pushes, with the similar algos dictating this market, Tesla could do the same thing, either retesting 240 then bouncing, or it drops a little bit lower. I mean, if there's a bad news, it could drop down to like 235, 238, and then 235, and then it bounces. It's got to be one of those two. So let's just see how it reacts to 240 first. And then the bottom line is it's most likely going to bounce, right? That's the bottom line. I think it's going to hit 240 and then bounce from there. That's what I'm leaning towards. But it all depends on the news and other factors, which I can't truly predict. So that's what I'm leaning towards, and we'll see what happens from there. But anyways, thank you all for listening. Have a great Sunday. Enjoy some football and do what you have to do. Market to the moon as the long term is very, very bright alongside Tesla. And peace out.